Greetings, my name's Andrew Sumner. My grandfather, Pop Smythe, bought me my first comic book in Liverpool, England, when I was 3 years old, and I spent the next 50 years hurtling around the pop culture kaleidoscope, first as a fan, and then as a journalist, editor, publisher and presenter. Along the way, I met a bunch of interesting people who will be joining me here: creators, performers, professionals and public servants. We live in divisive, fractured times, but art and popular culture connect people from all viewpoints and from all walks of life. I'm often struck by the passions people enjoy, that they can set aside their differences for and agree on whatever those passions are, whether I share them or not. And that spark, that moment of instinctive, connective agreement, that's what I call a hard agree. How much interaction did you have over the years with the DC War Library, with the war books?
Oh, I edited Unknown Soldier for a bunch of years, and Weird War. Those were the only two of the war books that I had real long connections with.
Yeah.
I was Joe Orlando's assistant when he inherited. When Archie Goodwin left DC in the 1970s, Carmine Infantino had a conversation with the editorial staff and said, guys, I can either hire somebody else or I can divvy the books up between you and give you freelance fees on top of your staff salaries for the extra work that you're doing. And the guys signed up for it. So Joe inherited Star Spangled War Stories and took Unknown Soldier in a very different direction than what had been done previously. So I got to work on that as assistant editor. Can't say I made a major contribution to it. Oh, and I forgot Men of War. And then when I became an editor, I inherited...
Oh, yeah, Men of War was Gravedigger, right? Is that right? Yeah.
When I inherited Star Spangled War just as it changed into Unknown Soldier to edit. And I inherited Weird War at some similar point. And then I guess around 77, I got to launch Men of War, and I helped develop Gravedigger with David Michelinie. David's not always as comfortable developing plot ideas as he's writing. He's a wonderful writer, and I guess I was more of a history buff than he was. So I came up with the logic for the Gravedigger strip and handed that to him.
That's so interesting, because that's so important to that book, the central logic of why he is who he is.
Well, Jeanette was very anxious to diversify the DC line. We'd already introduced Black Lightning. That was the first DC title to have a man of color, person of color as the protagonist. And for whatever reason, the next idea up was to do something within the war line. That was a challenge, because at that point the conventional wisdom was that World War II was the only war we could sell. Vietnam, the emotional wounds from Vietnam were still too raw in America, and World War II for America was a totally segregated war. So how do you do an ongoing war comic about somebody who wouldn't be allowed to be in any kind of glorious role? How do you fudge that? And I'm not sure the fudges that we came up with were remotely historically legitimate any more than some of the other fantasies and comics over the years. It's about as realistic as Captain America.
Yeah.
Unrealistic in a whole different set of ways.
Yeah.
But it got out there, it did okay. And in an era where I think a lot of people who were reading the war books might have been draftees who included an awful lot of guys of color.
Yeah.
Hopefully it was something that had some emotional resonance for them. And we did some fun strips in the backup, got to work with Jerry Grandinetti on Dateline Frontline that Carrie Burkett created there, and then Rosa that Paul Kupperberg did, worked with Chaykin on Enemy Ace.
Oh, yeah. He was great on that, I thought.
I mean, how Howie's worst days are better than most people's good days.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. With regard to, you were talking about Unknown Soldier, and by the way, you've answered a query I've always had, because the great thing sometimes is with certain comic book creators, you read their name and you only ever read their name. You don't hear it in conversation. And so you don't always know, as a reader, as a fan, how to pronounce it. And you just gave me one of those cues. And over the years, I've managed to either meet or, accumulate the information about certain names which are tricky, right? But you just gave me one I actually didn't know, which is David Michelinie, right?
I'm not sure it isn't the Brooklyn version of it, but I was fairly friendly with David in those years. Yeah. David actually played a role in explaining me to myself. One of the mysteries of my life.
Well, please continue. That's fascinating.
One of the quirks of my body is that I'm sensitive to sunlight. And when I go out in strong sunlight without really good shades on, I sneeze a few times. Yeah. Sort of adapting to it. And I did not know that was the phenomenon. But David and I share that quirk in our physiology, and he understood it and explained it when we were sneezing simultaneously on some occasion. And it was, oh shit, that's why that happens to me?
And what's the reason, Paul?
I've never had it medically explained.
But there's a connection. It's like, well, certain physiology, the sun will make you sneeze.
And what it explained to me, in part, was why I was out of school as many days as I was as a young kid. Because my mother was enormously protective. Yeah. I'd been homesick with a cold. If I walked out the first day to go back to school, started sneezing, she would just yank me back in and no, you're not well yet. I was out so much in second grade. My second grade teacher, who was a neighbor, was afraid that I hadn't learned to read, which was quite a laugh.
Particularly given how you ended up spending your career.
Well, and given the amount of reading I was already doing by the time I was in second grade, my reading level was well beyond anything they were tracking at that point.
Wow, what an interesting story. And I'm going to use that moment to say, welcome to Hard Agree. I'm Andrew Sumner, and I'm here with my special guest, Paul Levitz, famously the long-term president and publisher of DC Comics, the hugely recognizable author of brilliant runs on Legion of Superheroes and on Justice Society, and well-known comics historian, and all-around great bloke and font of comic book knowledge. We were talking a while back for my day job at Forbidden Planet TV, and we got into some interesting things in that conversation, which made me think that we could have a nice deep dive here about some of the bits and pieces that have been banging around my head for 20 years or so that I want to ask you about. And just to finish off on our little divergence about the DC War books, when you were talking about your time on Unknown Soldier, when it flipped from Star Spangled War to the Unknown Soldier title, were you on the book around that period of time when there was that experimentation with showing the soldier's injured face for a period of time? Do you remember was that you?
I'm not. I think that was Joe. I think when Joe Orlando took over Star Spangled War, 75, I'm going to say, and he brought David Michelinie on to write it and Jerry Teleyak on to draw it. But Joe's background was most deeply steeped in either science fiction comics or horror comics. And I think he was very comfortable with the sort of horrific aspect of showing the soldier's face. I think that was really the moment when it was first done.
Interesting. And yeah, I'm sure it was, but it was a departure. It didn't last for a long time. It seemed to go back into the anonymity of his face, and the bandages and whatnot seemed to reassert itself after maybe a year or so. But there are some very distinctive covers, which I think were probably the first issues of Unknown Soldier that I ever read actually personally. Where there's one that I can distinctly remember. I think it's a Kubert cover where the soldier is kind of hiding in an alleyway somewhere, or in a kind of Nazi building. And he's there in a kind of German uniform, but with a face mask off, so you see his kind of like horrifically injured face.
Wasn't kidding about 40,000 comic books sitting out there.
This is brilliant. This is brilliant. Now, this is a first for me. Having a chat with someone who's then got the bound edition of the comic book that I'm referencing. That is brilliant.
So here's Joe's first issue, I think, of Star Spangled War.
That's exactly the cover I'm talking about. That is 100% it. That is, mate, that is brilliant. I'm going to invite you to all my comics conversations now, Paul. That's which one again? Which one was that?
183.
183. That's exactly it. Wonderful.
Did I start? I don't think I edited any of the Star Spangles. No, I start when they change over the title to be Unknown Soldier.
Yeah.
A few years after that. So that's 1974.
Wow, amazing. And it could be yesterday. I just so distinctly remember seeing that cover, and then I think I picked that up, but then I started reading Unknown Soldier regularly, just as it flipped to being the title of the book. It was another favourite of Pop's, my grandfather, and at that point it gone back into more of the World War II intrigue, bandage face, unknown identity, spy kind of approach, and it left me for years thinking, as one did in that kind of pre-comics history internet era, like had I almost imagined that he revealed his face at a certain point. And of course, it's all well documented now. If read any of the great Tomorrow's magazines, and there's been at least 2 or 3 articles about it over the years. But it was one of those things. It was very much in my mind for a long time. So very interesting.
Sam Moskowitz, who was the great historian of science fiction at one point, had the line that the golden age of science fiction is 12, and I'm not sure 12 is exactly the magic number, but I think there's an age at which we imprint. Yeah. And whether it's comics or the television shows that we love, there's a magic to that stuff.
Yes.
And it may not recreate when we sit there and watch it again.
No, that's so true.
Incredibly fond memories of my favorite Martian with Ray Wolf and Bill Bixby. And when I sat down and finally found some of it on, I don't know, YouTube or wherever it was sort of, and I loved that. The 29-cent special effect of his antenna coming up. They're both very good actors, of course, so maybe that's an excuse. But there's something magic about remembering that comic, remembering where you bought it, bringing yourself back to that moment in your life.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's a hugely resonant thing, and I think it's one of the things that fuels conversations like this, podcasts like this, with people talking about that emotion. It's a hugely powerful thing, and I too have had that experience countless times where, I've got this real love for certain American TV shows that I just absolutely loved on the cusp of my teens. And the fascinating thing is most of them don't hold up, apart from the title sequence. The title sequence is glorious, right? Because that's your distilled emotion right there. And then you watch the actual episode and it's like, oh man, nothing happens. And nothing happens every week, and it's the same story all the time, right? With exceptions, which I think the exceptions are truly fascinating. For me too, the exceptions might be, so out of, say, 4 shows I truly loved, Star Trek, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Mission Impossible, and The Rockford Files, I think you can still pretty much watch The Rockford Files and Star Trek and enjoy it, yeah. I think it's very difficult to watch The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Mission Impossible because they're essentially the same all the time, yeah. And they probably haven't travelled out of that era quite as well.
Not shows I fell in love with. I mean, I was
everybody has their different thing, right? What were yours, Paul?
I was a Get Smart kid.
Brilliant.
The wise ass humor in that,
just
was wonderful for me, and I guess Barbara Feldon may have been one of my first crushes.
Yes, yeah. Well, you're a man of good taste, quite rightly so.
So that's sort of the first TV show that I remember being important to me. I remember buying all the little mass market paperback adaptations of it at school book fairs. I've not tried to find those and read those again because I'm pretty sure I'd be disappointed.
Yeah.
But the hint of Mel Brooks and Buck Henry that was in that, when I look back, it's sort of like, oh, okay, those guys worked on it. Good taste. That's okay.
What was your first experience like that in the comic book space? What comic books did you first truly love?
I mean, the first stuff that I fell into was Mort Weisinger's Superman line.
Yeah.
I'm of the right age that Jerry Siegel was back writing some of it. Ed Hamilton was occasionally doing something. A lot of very solid writers building a very complicated mythology at that point.
Who were we talking about on art at that point? Would that have been sort of, were you into Wayne Boring, or was it after that? Or
No, it's sort of at that point. Boring's doing a little bit of it. Mostly, I think he was on the newspaper strip at that point, but he'll have an occasional story. A lot of Al Plastino.
Yeah.
Was there a fourth guy? That's Kurt Schaffenberger on a rare occasion, mostly doing the Lois Lane stuff.
Yeah, I loved his art, by the way, Kurt Schaffenberger. I thought he was wonderful.
Beautiful line. John Fort doing the Legion of Superheroes, which was the stuff I loved the most. George Papp doing Superboy. Interesting stable of solid artists on it. And then the Legion became really my first thing that I would collect, that I would seek passionately.
And that's throughout all of that early Adventure Comics era. Yeah. Which you ended up being the editor on Adventure Comics, right?
I got to edit Adventure Comics at one point, and of course got to write the Legion. And then when that became available, when Jim went over to Marvel in the mid '70s, I probably would have killed anyone in the hall who tried to talk Jenny into getting the assignment.
And how did that moment feel, having fallen in love with the Legion when you did, having that be one of your core experiences, to then be able to become so closely identified with it? What was that journey like?
You know, it's one of the great pleasures of my life, but I've been insanely lucky professionally. I'm a kid who loved this stuff and got to grow up and do, in many ways, more with it than almost anyone gets to. But I got to do it so young, I didn't have any real perspective on how ridiculously lucky I was. And you mentioned that you're a Ditko fan. You know, I think I was 18 maybe when I got to create Stalker.
Wow, amazing.
And Steve Ditko and Wally Wood drawing it.
Oh, which is such a beautiful combination. Ditko and Wood together, I think. I just wish they created more comics together because they're so suited. What's fascinating about them, and I don't wish to talk across your anecdote because I'm anxious to hear it. You just made me excited about the letter that I have. Many people have got many letters from Ditko, but the one I have is about, which actually it hangs up in my hallway, is about him talking about his creative partnership with Wally Wood on Stalker. And because a comic I always loved was that very short-lived Atlas title, The Destructor. And I think the first issue of that, which is the two of them, and it's Archie Goodwin on the script, it's just a beautiful, like post Spider-Man origin issue. And I think I've loved it for years. And for years, I didn't have issues 2 through 4. I did ultimately, but it was exactly one of those artifacts you were talking about earlier, that it was this sacred one comic book that I just absolutely loved. But I loved that combination on Stalker. I thought was fantastic. So for you to work with the two of them on that must have been wonderful.
I mean, they're so compatible. I mean,
yeah.
Both fabulous storytellers, but Steve is a more dynamic superhero storyteller and Woody just had. You walk into a Wally Wood panel. It's a complete finished set scene. Steve is at his heart a great cartoonist, and Woody at his heart is a great illustrator. He understood cartooning and articulated it as well as any artist of his generation, but he has that illustrator gene to make a world real in a unique and powerful fashion. So, but I didn't think anything of it. I mean, I'm excited. It was beautiful stuff. I'm getting to create something, but the outrageousness of it didn't sink in. You know, looking back, my career involved DC breaking quite a number of labor laws in how young I was hired and the ways we were employed in those days. my elevation to the business side of the company was mostly a function of the parent company not giving a damn about DC. So it's kind of, well, I guess somebody has to do it. If you want to put a 24-year-old kid in that position of responsibility, Jeanette, fine. Doesn't matter. Someone has to sweep the floors. But as it's happening, you realize you're lucky on some level, but it's very hard to step away from it and realize how ridiculous it is that it's happening. In retrospect, it's like, okay, I'd never let any of those things happen.
Oh, it is fascinating to stick with Ditko for a while, because you then went on to co-create the Prince Gavyn version of Starman, which was in Adventure Comics, and as I recall it, that was when Adventure Comics was like 2 lead features, one of which was Starman, and
Plastic Man was usually.
And Plastic Man, right? Yeah, okay, yeah, brilliant. And it was that iteration of Starman, was that your creation that you took to Steve to illustrate? How did that work?
Yeah. Len Wein was editing Adventure, and he just picked up the book. He wanted to do it as a 2-feature book, and offered me the shot to do something. And we worked out the Starman idea. It was good. It was a good name DC wasn't using at that point. The original character felt old.
Yeah.
By that point, I didn't update it nearly as well as James Robinson later would.
Well, I'd like to get onto that in a second, because I think there's a beautiful outcome for your character with the James Robinson run. But to stick with your creation of Prince Gavyn, because it was Ditko, and if I remember correctly, the inks were Romeo Tangal. Is that right?
Yeah, Romeo did those issues.
And
we did about 8 issues, 9 issues, something like that.
Yeah.
And it didn't quite wrap up the story, so I got the opportunity fairly shortly thereafter. I was occasionally writing a DC Presents for Julie to wrap up the story there. And
you got Jim Starlin to do that, right? Yeah. That was great. As you can see, I'm a big fan of that strip. I really, it's probably, for me personally, it's my favorite thing of yours that you've written. That's my favorite. That's my favorite creation of yours. I always loved it. And
I guess you were the right age. I mean, I think it was fine. I mean, I think it was a distinctive story. It wasn't the kind of material DC or Marvel were doing a lot of at that point. Some of it's a little kind of on the nose, unsubtle, that I would like to think I wouldn't do today. But we had fun with it. Steve seemed to enjoy it. I'm really happy looking back. Steve didn't work with a lot of writers happily.
Yeah.
He was happiest writing his own material. And the couple of experiences we had, I guess about 20 stories all in. He enjoyed working with me. And as a result, we did, I think it's the only one of his independent works that actually he worked with a writer and didn't do himself. The one job we did for Imagine. Like Friedrich's Star Reader.
And how did you find Ditko personally?
I liked Steve. He was he doesn't his preference was not to talk about himself to his readers, so I've tried to honor that. And he always said he wanted his work to speak for itself, so I honored that. He was a private man during his life. He's entitled to keep that privacy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And something you touched upon was one of my favourite DC books ever, actually, is James Robinson's Starman, which I think is far and away, I think James Robinson's a great writer, but I think that's far and away the best thing he's ever done, personally. And
of the stuff I've read, I may not have run across something else he did that was wonderful, but it's a beautiful run.
Oh, it's an incredible write, and I think it works beautifully on 2 levels. I think number one, I think for me it's probably the first and the greatest superhero dynasty book. I mean, you could argue, I guess, that Dynasty was a factor of, say, the Flash books, but I think what he very deliberately did with Starman, where I felt as I was reading that he was operating in an area that I'd not seen before, is that he kept all these multiple iterations of the character kind of alive and coexisting and intermingled. And I think the way he resolved your Starman with the other 80s Starman was kind of brilliantly done. I thought it was a beautiful denouement, the way he wrapped it all together in the same way I guess that Gaiman did in the early issues of Sandman with all the different incarnations of Sandman, but in a very different way. I thought he did a very beautiful job with that, and I got the sense when I was reading it, but I'd be interested to know what you thought, that was probably an outcome for your Prince Gavyn Starman that you were happy with.
I've always had the attitude about my work in comics that when you go to write characters, excuse me, set in a pre-existing universe, you're building on the work of other people. I didn't ask Bob Kane about the Huntress. I knew Bill Finger, but he was dead already by that point. I couldn't ask Bill. So why should I expect the next guy to ask me or gal? It's the mainstream superhero work is in many ways a relay race. And you get handed the baton and it's your lap, and make it as glorious as you can, go as fast as you can, or whatever makes it wonderful. And then you're handing the baton to somebody else. And often you don't get to pick who the next person holding it is. And you don't have any control over it. And you probably shouldn't have any control over it. And sometimes you really love it. And sometimes you do your best not to read it because it looks like a traffic accident. I was a great fan of James's work. I agree with you about the comparison to Neil. The difference, I think, obviously Sandman's one of the great works in comics, but Sandman is not fundamentally superhero mythology. It borrowed beautifully from the mystery books mythology, from a couple of prior Sandmans in some fashion or other, the connection to what Karen would ultimately do as Sandman Mystery Theater. But what James was doing was a modern superhero book for its time. And he was taking all of these elements from very, very different periods of what a superhero book could be and connecting them into this modern take on the mythos, which is a very different kind of challenge. Not better or worse, just two cooks in different kinds of restaurants.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think it's fascinating that he kind of created a book essentially with a beginning, a middle, and an end that so far, I mean, this might not always be the case, but so far has pretty much been left alone by other people. And if they've done stuff with Starman, it's been another Starman or another, but the Jack Knight Starman doesn't seem to have been played around with too much by anybody else.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I believed in greatly as a publisher was that there were certain things that were so well done that you shouldn't let the baton get passed to the next person. And I always felt that way about Archie and Walt's Manhunter. And
oh, yeah, for sure. Wow. Yeah.
It's certainly Neil on Sandman had been one of those critical cases. That was the first time we ever agreed as a company not to continue publishing a successful title after the writer was leaving.
Yeah.
And Alan and Dave's work on Watchmen, which is well known that I didn't want us doing any sequel work to that.
Yes, yeah. Which I think was absolutely the right call, and I'm sure that's exactly what David said, who's here on this call too. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. You touched upon something then that gave me some thoughts. But classically, and now that I'm thinking about it, there was something you said, I thought, man, yes, I've got to ask you about that. And it's disappeared for the time being. So I'll come back to that when I think of it. Something that I wanted to ask you about was your relationship with another one of my great comics heroes, Will Eisner. And you, of course, I imagine you were heavily involved with the move to bring him into DC towards the end of his career to become his publisher with those beautiful editions you did. But one of my favourite comics projects ever, which I proudly own every edition of, is the Spirit Archives. What you did, which I understand, maybe I've misheard this story, but I understand that Will wasn't initially keen to do, is the fact that you republished all of it, including the non-Eisner years when he was in the military, which I feel as a fan was a very important thing to do. Yeah, in terms of you have the light and shadow of that incredible incandescent sort of post-war work that he did between like 45 and 51. But I think it's very interesting seeing that in the context of what happened while he was away. So I was really appreciated the fact that's what you did.
Well, I mean, I remember very vividly Bob Wayne and I were in Baltimore visiting Diamond for whatever reason. But we did a lot of business, obviously, back and forth.
Of course, yeah.
And we were at dinner, and we had just gotten the news, I guess, of kitchen sink folding.
Yeah.
And it was, maybe we've got a shot at the Spirit. Maybe we've got a shot at Will. And debating over dinner with Bob whether it would be better for it to be in our archive series, or I think there was somebody else doing something good in reprinting. Would it be better for us to do it in archives, or would it be better for somebody else to do it this other way? I don't remember what the other alternative. And I had the great fun that the timing worked out to sign the contract with Will at a panel with Will at San Diego.
Brilliant.
Probably in the next year sometime. I knew Will from my fanzine days. I had met him, I guess, when I was 15 or 16 years old. He was at a studio in Manhattan doing the Army stuff mostly, before Contract with God. I had collected the Spirit sections for a while as a kid. I'd gotten about half the run. I'm very, as you can tell from 40,000 comics, I'm very much a completionist. If I can't have the whole thing, I don't want any of it. So I ultimately ended up selling off the half of the Spirit sections that I had, because it wasn't going to be possible to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
It was too complicated. So it was one of the things that had frustrated me in my collecting. So it was, for that reason alone, it was a great pleasure to be able to put it all together. It's a complex history. There's Ebony to deal with.
Yeah, of course.
Will was young. He had grown up in a very inwardly focused society. And I have perhaps not unique, but an unusually direct perspective on Will, in that my family was immigrant Jews.
Yeah.
All of my grandparents, even my mother, were Jews from what was called the Pale of Settlement. Depending on the day, it was Lithuania or Russia or Poland. I don't know whose tanks were in which direction. Some of the same crap we're seeing again today, I guess.
Yeah.
So I was fairly connected to the world that Will chronicled and that Will himself grew up in. And I believe that Will grew up in a world where, while he was being prejudiced in his depiction of it, he wouldn't have fully realized he was being prejudiced, because that was the exposure he was getting to people of both in the culture, in how art was taught in those days, because art was certainly taught with the power of caricature and racial caricature as a normative behavior. It would have been great if he was more enlightened and had somehow gotten the idea, but he probably didn't know a person of color on any sort of decent level.
Yeah.
He did that. He was very young. And then he goes off to war, meets people who aren't Jews. If you were an immigrant Jew in the 1930s and the 1940s, you had very limited exposure to other kinds of people. He went to DeWitt Clinton, which was a very large high school. I don't remember the ethnic mix of it, but it was very heavily Jewish in those years. And it was certainly very heavily white.
Is that the same high school that Stan Lee went to?
Stan and Bob Kane and Bill Finger.
Yeah, wow. Okay.
It was the largest high school in New York in those years. And of course, you're in a period when high schools are very new in New York. That generation is pretty much the first generation where high school is compulsory in our part of it. He comes back and he starts cleaning up his act a little bit. He's never great about it, but at least Ebony loses a bunch of the minstrel characteristics.
Yeah.
But it's an important body of work because it's really representative of that process of mastering the comic book page. Before Will's work, and specifically his work on the Spirit, comic book artists were following the logic of the newspaper comic strip exclusively. And while there'd been some brilliant experimentation, like Winsor McCay, certainly, generally speaking, it was the solidity of the panels and the solidity of the camera placement. You look at Foster's stuff, magnificent as it is.
Yeah.
It's a frozen camera.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Eisner's fascination with the German expressionist films, with film in general, starts creating this translation in the material that is a powerful influence. Kurtzman is too young. Harvey doesn't show up for another decade, basically. Jack is creating the language of physical dynamic of fighting, but he's not brilliant yet about his camera. He frankly would, in my view, would never be Will's equal in terms of complex storytelling with the camera. Jack just was the most fertile imagination we ever had in comics.
Yeah.
And the best depictor of power and impact.
Yeah, very propulsive, right, what he does.
Jack and Erwin Hazen are the first two artists, I think, who understood what fighting was. Maybe from their own background on the, in Jack's case, the Lower East Side. In Erwin's case, his early work on some of the sports cartooning. Maybe Joe Simon contributed to that knowledge. Joe had been a sports cartoonist as well for a minute in his career. But Jack really embodies that. But Will figures out the comic book page, what you can do with the page, how you can do a cutaway, how you can do a triptych, all the tricks that you look at now and it's sort of like, oh yeah, I guess I've seen that 4,000 times. Right, but in 1942, you hadn't seen it any times.
Yeah.
And that he contributed so much in that period that was so important.
I think that's so interesting. I mean, I certainly think it's the way the comics play out, temporally speaking, that he was just such a master of time on the page and manipulating time. And also, I think his post-war spirit is the first time I really got a sense of artist and letterer working in harmony. Those beautiful Abe Canigson letters that you get in the post-war spirit, just it really enhances what Will was doing, I think.
Walt Kelly may have been doing it before Will with the lettering. He was certainly the first guy who really understood font in a powerful way in comics. I'm not a great maven on Kelly's work. I'd have to defer to probably Maggie Thompson would know better than I would for the right examples of that. But in the heroic dynamic, Will certainly is the first one who makes all of that work. And the platform, the pulpit that Will had to work with there, with the Spirit, because of the newspaper distribution of it, the funding that was available to him because of that. It's an awesome period. And to produce that quality of work in a studio with that frequency, one of the great fun afternoons of my entire life when I was working on the book on Will was going out to spend the afternoon with Jules Pfeiffer, getting to know him, and discovering that we knew many of the same people in comics and had worked with them. He at the very beginning of their career and me at the very end.
Yeah,
And, his talking about Jerry Grandinetti as the young architecture student who was great at doing backgrounds, and my talking about Jerry, who was a great master of many of the things that Will had brought into it, the fluidity of Jerry's work in his later years.
Yeah, what a wonderful turn of events, and how lovely to be able to share those different perspectives. I think that's no doubt a great moment to have had, and I think there's no doubt that what you and Bob, who's as you know, Bob Wane's a very good friend of mine, as he is yours. The fact that you all got to work together on that later era of Will's publishing, and kind of you were his publisher when Will passed away, weren't you? He passed away in the middle of the archives coming out, if I recall.
Yeah, I think we were still doing some of the archives at that point.
Had he flipped to W.W. Norton for doing some of the collections?
He had gone over to Norton for the original graphic novels by that time.
Yeah.
He came to us. We'd been publishing his graphic novels, whatever, for a bunch of years, post Dennis. And he was doing the deal with Norton for...
It's the plot, I guess. It was...
No, this was before
the plot. Earlier than that, yeah.
The Dickens book.
Fagin the Jew.
Fagin the Jew. He'd done his deal with Norton, and he really wanted to bring his backlist over to Norton. He felt it would have a better chance there. And Will, his whole life, had wanted to be with a real publisher.
Yeah.
He'd been working on that consistently. And I remember sitting there and we were talking about what Norton could do and what we could do. And I said, we're learning, Will. We're getting better at that. No, I agree. Norton's better at publicity than we are. They're better at working with bookstores than we are. We're learning. Will said, I don't have that much time. I can't afford to wait. He didn't know how close he was to the end, but he knew he was in his mid-80s at that point.
Yeah.
And we worked out a very unusual deal to have him buy back his backlist titles. They weren't great home runs for DC. They were more a matter of pride than anything else.
Yes, yeah.
So he was able to bring them over to Norton.
That's very interesting. It must have been a privilege to get to work with him and have an impactful relationship on those later stages of his creative life.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Will was a brilliant guy, and it just to get to be truly a friend to him and to Anne was a delight.
Yeah, I'm sure. Speaking of great artists, what can you share with me about your relationship or your impression of working with Joe Kubert?
Joe is this wonderfully warm human being. Was one of the innate talents of life. To be a top artist in the field at 14 or 15. Again, unlikely to ever happen again, but unlikely to ever have happened in the first place. He was so happy with the teaching, with building the school. He was so conscious of the luck he had had in life. When he passed, two stories, two related stories. When Muriel passed, his wife, who had been basically his business manager for a bunch of years, so I had gotten to know her. I knew a few of the wives of the older guys really well because they managed the flow of work or the business of their husbands. When Muriel passed, very suddenly, been very sad. And I had written Joe a note based on an old Jewish saying, word in Hebrew, dayenu, which means enough. And there's whether it's a song or a prayer saying that if this person had done that, that would have been enough. But they did this, and that would have been enough. It goes on. And I did a little thing based on dayenu, talking about Muriel's contributions to his life, I guess. It's about a week after the funeral, This has been totally disruptive to Joe's life because not only is his wife and partner of all these years who's passed, but it's his partner in running the school. She ran the administrative business side of his business. He's got 5 kids who are in mourning in different fashions, bunches of grandchildren who are affected by all of this, the students. It's a week later, and a Sergeant Rock cover shows up on my desk, framed, signed by Joe, with a thank you note for what I've done. What the fuck?
Yeah.
When he passed, the school's in a little town called Dover, New Jersey. It's not that little a town, but it's a New York suburb. The funeral procession shut down the town. It was maybe half a mile long, maybe a mile long, winding its way through the town. Just generations of the students, Rick Veach, Steve Bissett, Mandrake, and Ursima. Those are the ones I knew. Many of them, of course, I didn't know. People who'd worked with Joe all the years. Just a horde of us, all in this procession as it's winding through. Very, very talented, very strong guy.
Yeah. No, and such a great sort of legacy at DC. Every cover, every piece of artwork, such a beautiful piece of work. One of those early comics appreciating life memories that I've got, and I didn't fully understand what all of it was about until I was a bit older. Was that great issue of, I think it's the Kubert issue of DC Special, if I remember correctly, where he's got the autobiographical strip at the beginning, yeah. And there's that tremendous moment where he's referencing Russ Heath partying it up at the Playboy Mansion, which is a reference I didn't get for years until I heard the story about Russ Heath's time at the Playboy Mansion.
Well,
But I remember you see that breakdown of all his kids, a number of whom are very famous. That's the one, right? So for those of you listening to this, as ever, Paul has got this to hand and has just got hold of his bound version of it. I must say, mate, your bound editions, the colours on them are incredibly vibrant. Yeah, they just look so lovely.
Well, I mean, it depends on which ones.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the DC specials are things I bought off the stand as a kid.
Yeah.
So they were well taken care of for a long time. The things that I filled in where it was from before my time, I never was a great grading or quality or mint collector. So I want to read the stories.
Yeah,
so there's large runs of things that are a little more beat up.
Yeah.
And then, of course, all the stuff that came out once I was in the industry went straight into being bound very, very early on. It's an odd fetish doing the bound volumes. My older son, who is the most serious, I don't know if he's the most serious of my children, but he and my daughter are the two serious souls.
Yeah.
My older boy was born old.
Yeah.
And I'd get the fresh bound volumes back from the binder every year. And I keep my collection in a highly organized fashion, as you can tell from how quickly I can find these things. So every year when they come back, I'd have to move every bound volume to interfile the new ones. And Philip was about 10. I guess he decided it would be a nice daddy and son thing to help daddy with moving the binding.
Yeah.
So he helps me for a little bit of time. And then he's looking around the room. I had this beautiful library in the house I was living in those years. I had built the house and stolen the attic space over my study so I could have 12-foot high, 350 bookcases.
Great.
One of those old rolling ladder routines.
Yeah.
So he looks around and says, Dad, how much did you spend binding your comics? And I said, well, Philip, you've taken estimating in school. You can figure that out. So he goes to the drawer and pulls out the little pocket calculator. Starts going around the room, punching things in, figuring it out. I said, what does it cost to do one of these? I said, I don't know, about $20 a book, I think, at the time. Dad, you spent $25,000 buying? Boy, you're a schmuck. You know, it's gonna pay for you. It's gonna pay for your college, kid.
Don't knock it.
Well, you ate yesterday, right? But that was the future lawyer in him.
Yeah, of course. And you know how wonderful that you know your kids have all represent these different facets of who you are as a person, have made them their own, and that must. I know, being a parent myself, that the success of one's children is far more important actually than the success of your own career.
It's fabulous. It's wonderful that your children grow up to be unique, good people. And look, it's a joy if your kids are good bookkeepers. Whatever the simplest profession you want to do, good retail shop workers, as long as they're good people. But I have the phenomenal success. I have 3 kids. My daughter is an executive at Planned Parenthood. She runs their chat and text rooms for the U.S. She touches 200,000 people a year.
That's tremendous.
In need of advice or help with the program she's devised. She's the same kid who would lean out of her carriage at 1 year old and feed pizza crust to a homeless person.
Yeah.
And she's been working her whole life to do good stuff. My older boy, who was the serious academic monster in the team, is a lawyer. He works for the New York State, what we call the Solicitor General, which is the part of the government legal office that does more complex legal matters, not trial work, but appellate work. And he's most recently been the lawyer signing the brief for, I think it's 45 states suing Facebook, and he's had to lead this team procedure across this multi-state environment. And then my youngest is the only one who actually liked what I did for a living. The other two, I will do again a plug, is the co-producer on the movie Dog, which is coming out in a minute or two.
Channing Tatum movie Dog, yeah, which looks like a lot of fun.
He's had a ball working on these things.
Yeah,
quite. It's fabulous to have kids who succeed at becoming who they want to be.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I'm very pleased for you. That I think supremely important. I'm very pleased for you that you're in that glorious situation, actually, mate. As we rock into the final leg of our conversation, there's a couple of things I'm mindful of. I wanted to ask you about, we were talking about some of my favourite comics that you've scripted earlier on, but another one which we didn't touch upon, something that I truly loved when it came out, and it's a relatively short run, was your revived All-Star comics in the 70s. Yeah, and well, now that I think about it, Wally Wood worked on that with you as well, didn't he?
Actually, yeah. That was Woody's last mainstream superhero work.
Amazing, and it's beautiful work. That's one of those comics for me that I've got a lot of emotional attachment to. But I haven't read them for quite a while, so this is all from the indelible memories I have of it. But yeah, so you're obviously going to know the answer to this inside out, but I had the sense that one of the things that you did, the bringing the Star Spangled Kid into everything, that was seemed to me at the time that outside of the JLA JSA team ups and the Seven Soldiers of Victory team up in the early 70s, that was one of the first times that the roster of heroes in the JSA had become mixed up a little bit. Was that a character you'd always loved?
That's not my fault. That's Gerry Conway when he brought out All-Star Comics.
Right, okay.
Gerry, when given the opportunity to revive the JSA, didn't want to do a book that was all about old people.
Yeah, got it.
And he came up with this conceit that the story essence of the series would be the generational difference. So he brought in the Star Spangled Kid, and he came up with Power Girl as an alternative version of Supergirl, essentially. And he brought in Robin as not that young, but the successor generation. And Gerry, unfortunately, for his pleasure in getting to play with the toys, had to leave after a few issues when he got offered the opportunity to be the editor-in-chief at Marvel.
Yeah.
Sadly, that didn't work out. He was
Yeah, right.
editor-in-chief for 3 weeks, and then shifted to be a writer-editor for it, and had a good run there, did some interesting stuff.
And then, of course, has had that amazing TV run as well. You know, he had that after his post-comics run was incredible, right, on the Law and Order shows and whatnot.
I mean, Gerry's an enormously smart, good, talented guy. We were good friends. I was his assistant editor for a bunch of years when he was at DC. One thing I found fascinating about him in one of our later conversations in more recent years, when we're talking about the TV work and the comics work, he said, you know, as a writer, I think I write better in other people's voices. And he really looked at his body of work and felt that in television he was successful because on things like the Dick Wolf stuff,
yeah,
there was a voice there that he could slide into, and he could execute in it well. And the Marvel work, particularly the Spider-Man work, it was Stan's voice.
Yeah,
and he slide into that. He didn't feel, I think, as proud of his DC work because there wasn't a specific voice, and he had to try to find one and create one, and maybe wasn't there long enough to perfect it and develop it. And also the economics of the time, this is before the era of royalties, he had to do a hell of a lot of pages to make a decent living at the rates we were paying.
Yeah, got it.
That was dilutive of the possibility of really doing great quality work.
That I think it's very interesting what you're touching upon. I've just remembered, of course, All-Star was a Conway's Corner book, wasn't it? That's that was that era. Yeah, it's very.
I learned a lot from Gerry as his assistant, and when he left, they were divvying the books up. They needed people to cover them, and again, the Justice Society was something I had loved. The first comic I remember buying on a newsstand was that first JLA JSA team up. So it was me. I think, please, I love those guys. I know the history of it. And I got to do most of that run.
Yeah, it was glorious stuff, mate, and lives on incandescently in my subconscious. I too could root up my comics, but I'd have a more Byzantine route. I'd have to travel up to the north of England and leap into my mum and dad's loft. But they're there, you know. I can feel them calling to me 300 miles away.
I got a way to get them out of the loft and get them onto the shelves, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, I love what I must admit. I'm supremely impressed with the speed with which you can bring the issues we've been talking about to hand. That is amazing. The fact that you're right there with them, that's great.
It's good to be with your toys.
Yeah, for sure. And I've used that racking system you've got. Back when in my magazine publishing area, back when we were on Uncut, we had a whole library of rock and roll and rock music clippings, you know, from 70 years of British journalism. That's how we used to access all the archival material. So, you know, to have that for your own personal comic collection, I think is just wonderful.
It's probably not the most likely to pay off home improvement.
That's so true. Yeah.
But it makes me happy.
Yeah, I can see that, brother. I really can. Now, and before we go, just to wrap up on a couple of quick questions. In the whole period over your years working at DC, what do you feel has perhaps been the most underrated project that you were associated with that you didn't feel cut through as well as it could have done relative to its actual quality?
Maybe the Milestone books.
Yeah, they were great. They were good.
You know, I think you never know why something doesn't work.
Yeah.
When I look back on it, the only creative decision that I can argue with in retrospect was the coloring decision. And I understand absolutely why they made it. With the technology of the time, it wasn't possible with the then conventional coloring systems to do really a variety of skin shades.
Yeah.
So they came up with this reasonably cost-effective system that would let them reflect the diversity of the characters in the books.
Yeah.
But I think that was a negative in the process. I don't know how much bias played as a challenge to the book succeeding in the marketplace, but I know that they were as well written and well drawn as anything that we ever published. And the level of courage that the team had that was creating them, the sweat equity that those guys put into doing it was beyond imagination. I have enormous respect for what they pulled off there. And I'm sorry it didn't do better at the time, but I'm thrilled that it lives on in people's minds, and DC is trying to do all sorts of things right now to bring them back to the public view.
Yeah, it really does. I think that's very well said, and I think it was a very important piece of work. When you look back on all your years working in comics, who would you say would you be able to say I have one particular favorite artist? Is there a handful of people you say were up there for you?
It's the child in me. It's Curt Swan.
Yeah.
Because that's where I was that day. But the writer in me got to work with so many amazing people. The work I was able to do with Keith, the work Giffen, the work I was able to do with Joe Staten. In more recent years, the fun I had with Sonny Liu on Dr. Fate. I've been so privileged in all of that. To get to have something you worked on drawn by Steve Ditko, drawn by Jack Kirby, drawn by Carmine Infantino. It's outrageous. Drawn by Joe Kubert.
Yeah.
Did two of my stories. The talent that surrounded me all the years. Joe Orlando as my first important mentor, teacher, the boss who really gave me my career in the field. Getting to have him draw one of my stories along the way. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, beautifully ridiculous, and I think that's very well said, mate. And before we go, Paul, what are you working on at the moment?
So, unfortunately, the project I'm working on now, which would give you a great smile,
you can't tell me about on the radio on the podcast.
Yeah, has not yet been announced.
Yeah.
So I can't talk about that one. I spend about half my time teaching.
Yeah.
It's a great thrill as a kid who dropped out of college to be teaching in colleges and grad schools. It's kind of a cosmic revenge. See, Mom, it worked out okay. I'm so upset. I've done a lot of work in the last couple of years with Boom Studios.
Yeah.
I've been on board there.
They're a great team at Boom. Philip Sablick's a great bloke, isn't he? He knows what he's a very bright guy. A
lot of good folks there.
Yeah.
They've been having a fabulous couple of years. A lot of success with the Berserker project and Something is Killing the Children.
Oh, such a wonderful book, that Something's Killing Children. They've just done that Ram V book, The Many Deaths of Laila Starr. That's a good one too.
Yeah, they were just talking about that in a meeting yesterday. Is their best reviewed book of the year.
Oh yeah, he's a real talent. I think that guy. I know Ram pretty well. He comes on Forbidden Planet TV quite a bit, but
is he British?
Or? He's Anglo-Indian.
Okay.
Yeah, he grew up in India, but yeah, he lives here. He's a super talented guy. I think they've got echoes of what you did at DC actually with Boom, and this is no doubt why you work with them. They put everything you should put first. I think so. For them, it seems to me, as a guy who edits books and sells comics and works on this kind of stuff and works on a comics company myself, it seems to me that they really have the formula in terms of they're about the quality of the work first, and everything filters through that approach.
Their hearts are in the right place. Absolutely. It's a young company. There are challenges from that. They don't have the support structure. And in many ways, they're about the size DC was in the years that I started there.
Yeah.
But DC was part of this larger company, so you didn't have to worry about your check getting paid on Friday. And Boom had to worry about that in its years ago. There wasn't any magic checkbook there. So they've had a higher Olympic degree of difficulty, and they didn't have Superman and Batman there to build on. But I do think there's a lot of shared values with the values that we had in the good years of DC. And I think they're growing phenomenally, and I think they're on a great track to continue growing phenomenally.
I see that too, and I think you're absolutely right. And I too have inhabited that strange confluence of being an editorial person who's actually paid to be a business person. And something you've touched upon, which I don't see get talked about very often, but it's a really key thing. If you leap from working for a big multinational corporation, so in my case, like with yourself, I work for Time Warner, but I work for Time Warner UK. Right. And then for a period of time, I was running Cahiers du Cinema, the French cinema magazine in Paris. Did that for a year, but that was owned at that time. It had been owned by Le Monde, but it went to a much smaller company. And suddenly, for the first time in my career, I found myself managing cash flow, something you never think about if you work for a big corporation ever. Yeah, but it's of supreme importance when you need to pay your staff and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting that the hurdles in a smaller business like Boom, that the things you have to become involved with that within the corporate structure you just take for granted.
Well, and it's powers you can use, right? I mean, one of the reasons we were able to do things like the Spirit Archives, cash flow was not a problem for DC. Yeah. So we can do a print run for this book that will last us 5 years, and it's okay. And it's all that sort of frozen cash sitting in a warehouse somewhere. You can't do that if you're a small.
No, it's true. So true.
So that's been one of the interesting things working with Boom, has been sort of learning to use some different muscles or getting a perspective on how those different muscles work.
I think it's a wonderful outcome, that one of these many wonderful outcomes for you, that you're putting your many years of expertise in the business to good use, working with a company that indexes with your own standards and what you want to achieve. And they're certainly a great outfit. And sure, you've got decades to come of more interesting turns for your career, Paul.
I don't know about decades. We'll see.
If you keep your health, mate. And it's been wonderful having you on here, and I'm really filled with the sense that I've only scratched the surface of the questions that I could have asked you. So if you'd be doing me a great favour if you came back on at some point in the future, mate.
My pleasure, Andrew. Look, we're both of an age and stage where we have a lot that we can look back on. Yeah. The difference in my career and yours, I guess, is that I stayed largely on a single track, which for our generation was very unusual, at least in America. I mean, it may not have been as unusual in Britain, but very few people get to work for the same company. One way or another, I was on the DC payroll from the end of 1972 to the end of 2020. So that's 48 years.
Yeah, wow.
Nobody does that.
No, it's true. It's true, mate.
Just our kids don't stay anywhere for 48 months usually.
Yeah, right on. Absolutely.
So, you've got as many stories to tell as I do. There's just no singular podcast that's interested in all the different things you've done.
That is very true, mate. It really is. Yeah, it's absolutely the case. I'll
be happy to come back and pull some other comics off the rack for you one of these other days.
That will be a tremendous pleasure. And that you have been listening to Hard Agree. I'm Andrew Sumner, and my very special guest today has been the great Paul Levitz, talking about his unique career, his many, almost 50 years at DC Comics. And it's been a real pleasure to see you, Paul. It always is.
Always a pleasure, Andrew. Take care of yourself. Stay well in these crazy times.
Same to you, brother. Take care. All the best. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Hard Agree. This episode was edited by John Horsley and Kenrick Regan, and our theme music, Golden, was written and performed for this show by Liverpool's finest band, Denio. Hard Agree is a production of the Spoilerverse and myself, Andrew Sumner.